Detroit, January 2006, 2:47 a.m. Eminem's phone buzzed on his nightstand, pulling him from restless sleep where he'd been dreaming about something he couldn't remember, something uncomfortable that left him feeling watched. The number was blocked, which happened sometimes, fans or journalists who'd gotten his number somehow. But the message was just 3 words and a link. "They're watching you." His first instinct was to delete it, assume it was spam or paranoia fuel from someone trying to mess with him, but something about the timing. The hour when nobody legitimate would text. The simplicity of the message made him pause. Against every instinct screaming not to click random links, he clicked it. What loaded on his screen made his blood run cold. Security footage from his own studio, but angles he'd never seen before. Cameras positioned in places he didn't know cameras existed, covering blind spots he'd thought were private. Conversations he'd had in private. Moments he'd thought were just him and whoever he was working with. All time-stamped and cataloged with clinical precision. Creative dispute 11:03:05. Personal call 12:15:05. Production meeting Arrow 104:06. Each clip labeled, organized, archived like he was some kind of research specimen. Who had access to this footage? Who'd been cataloging his life like this? And more importantly, why were they showing it to him now? What had changed that made someone decide to warn him? Before he could process what he was seeing, his phone buzzed again. Same blocked number. "Check your contracts. Check everything. Trust nobody." The messages deleted themselves 3 seconds after he read them. Text vanishing like it had never existed, leaving no trace, and he was left sitting in the dark of his bedroom. Heart pounding hard enough he could hear it, wondering if paranoia was finally catching up to him, or if something much worse was happening. By 4 a.m. he was in his office pulling every contract from the past 5 years. Most looked normal, standard legal language. Then he found it on page 47 of a 2004 contract. Behavioral monitoring for quality assurance purposes. What did that mean? He found more in other agreements always buried. 17 contracts total giving unnamed parties permission to observe, record, and analyze his conduct. All negotiated by his old business manager. Why couldn't he remember exactly why he'd fired him? His phone rang. His lawyer, way too early. "Marshall, we need to talk. I just got served with a cease and desist from your label. They're claiming you violated contract terms, threatening to freeze your accounts unless you sign a new agreement by Monday." Eminem hadn't discussed anything with anyone.
"What terms?"
"They won't say. They keep citing Section 47 subsection C of your 2004 master agreement, which doesn't exist in the version I have." Ice in his stomach. So either they're bluffing or there's a contract you've never seen. "Exactly. Marshall, did you sign anything in 2004 that I didn't review?" Eminem thought back through the fog of pills and chaos. "I don't know. I signed a lot of stuff." "Not past me," his lawyer said carefully. "Past both of us." Eminem's signature on things he didn't remember. Who handled those documents? His old business manager. The same guy who negotiated the surveillance clauses. By afternoon, he'd tracked the manager to a modest house in Bloomfield Hills. Modest for someone who'd handled millions in contracts and negotiations, which immediately raised red flags. Eminem sat in his car across the street for 20 minutes, watching the windows, the quiet suburban street, wondering what he was walking into. Finally, the front door opened, and there he was. Older looking than Eminem remembered, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. When the guy saw Eminem walking up his driveway, his face went white. "Marshall, I can't talk to you. I signed..." "An NDA, I know." Eminem cut him off, not slowing down. "But here's the thing. I've got surveillance footage from my own studio that you helped install. 17 contracts with monitoring clauses you negotiated. So either you tell me what's really going on, or I go to the press with what I have and let them connect the dots back to you, and we both know where that ends." The manager looked around nervously, scanning the street like someone might be watching even here, even in this quiet neighborhood. "Come inside. You don't want to have this conversation where they can see." They? Who was watching the watchers? Eminem followed him into a house that felt temporary, transient, like a way station rather than a home. Bare walls, packed boxes stacked in the corner, minimal furniture. Someone ready to run at a moment's notice. "How long have they been watching me?" The manager poured coffee with hands that shook slightly. Took a long time to answer, like he was calculating how much to reveal, how much he could safely say. "Since 2001, maybe earlier, I'm not sure." I came in when the operation was already running, just took over the contract negotiations, the legal framework. What operation? Eminem's voice was harder now, patience wearing thin. You want the corporate name? They call it the influence index. Your label. Couple other major corporations, some kind of consortium thing they set up in the late 90s. They're running behavioral prediction models on high-profile artists, trying to figure out what makes you tick, what makes you successful, break it all down into quantifiable data they can replicate with other artists. The words made Eminem physically sick, but he kept his face neutral, kept pushing. Why would they do that? To manufacture it. Think about it, Marshall. If they can predict how you'll respond to pressure, how you create under stress, map your entire decision-making process, they can apply those same patterns to other artists, shape them, mold them into more controllable versions of what you are naturally. It's like trying to reverse engineer genius so they can mass produce it. And the intervention protocols I found in the contracts? The manager looked surprised he dug that deep, found language most artists would never notice buried in page 47 of standard agreements. When subjects deviate from projected patterns, when you start doing things that don't fit their models or threaten their investment, they course correct. You remember that mysterious illness you had in 2004? The one that kept you off tour for 2 months? Eminem remembered. Doctors had never found anything definitive, just exhaustion, they'd said. Stress told him to rest. That wasn't random bad luck or burnout. You were writing material they couldn't monetize, getting too experimental, too political, too real. The intervention brought you back to center, back to making the music that fit their projections and their profit margins. Rage built in Eminem's chest, cold and calculated, the kind that didn't explode but burned steady and dangerous.
Why are you telling me this?
What's your angle here? The manager met his eyes, and for the first time, Eminem saw something real there. Not the corporate negotiator, but an actual person with actual guilt. Because I'm out. I took their money for 4 years, did what they asked, helped them build the cage around you and dozens of other artists, but I'm done. Can't do it anymore. So you developed a conscience? Eminem said it with enough sarcasm to sting, to make it clear he wasn't impressed by late-stage morality. Something like that. Look, I've got kids now, and the thought of them growing up in an industry where this is normalized, where everyone's being monitored and manipulated and nobody knows, where art gets reduced to data points and algorithms, I can't be part of that anymore. He stood, moved to a desk in the corner, pulled out a USB drive from a locked drawer with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. Everything's on here. Internal memos, algorithm specifications, intervention logs for your case and 50 others. Names, dates, outcomes, financial projections, enough to bury the whole program if you know how to use it. Eminem took the drive, felt the weight of it. What happens to you? I disappear. Got a plan, been working on it for months. New identity, different city, offshore accounts they can't touch. But you've got the platform, the credibility, the resources to actually do something with this. The manager walked him to the door. One more thing, and this is important. Don't try to negotiate with them. Don't trust lawyers to handle it through normal channels. They'll tie you up in legal proceedings for years, bleed you dry, make you irrelevant before it ever sees a courtroom. You need to force their hand, make them react instead of plan, catch them when they're vulnerable. Eminem paused at the door. That text I got at 2:47 a.m., the surveillance footage, that was you? The manager's expression didn't change. I can't confirm that. But whoever sent it, they're on your side, even if you never find out who. Was that a yes or a no? Eminem couldn't tell, but something in the manager's eyes suggested there were layers here he wasn't seeing. Maybe other people involved, maybe other players in this game beyond just the label and their surveillance program. 3 days reviewing the USB files, prediction models reducing him to data points, notes on interventions. Subject responded to health crisis with increased commercial output. That 2004 illness wasn't random. They'd made him sick to measure how it affected his work. 50 other artists monitored, all unaware. But anger was clarifying. Going to the press now, they'd claim docs were fake. He needed leverage to corner them completely. He called his lawyer. Set up a meeting with the label. Saturday afternoon. Conference room at their headquarters. Tell them I'm ready to sign their new agreement. Marshall, we haven't even reviewed what they're asking for. I know. Trust me on this. This feels like a trap. It is, just not the one they're expecting. Saturday came cold and gray, typical New York winter. The label headquarters building was all glass and steel, designed to intimidate, to remind you that you were small and they were empire. Eminem walked through the lobby with his lawyer beside him, neither of them speaking, both knowing this meeting would determine everything. The conference room was on the 43rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city spread out below like a game board. 3 VPs waited, arranged on one side of a long mahogany table, their lawyers flanking them like soldiers. The oldest VP, silver-haired guy in his 60s who probably hadn't listened to a rap album since Run DMC, stood to shake hands. "Marshall, so glad you could make it. I think we can clear up this misunderstanding quickly and get everyone back to making music, which is what we all want, right?" The smile was practiced, the tone patronizing, like he was talking to a child who'd thrown a tantrum and was now ready to behave. Eminem didn't smile back, just took his seat, leather portfolio in front of him. The VP sat down, gestured to one of his lawyers, who slid a thick document across the table. "This is the amended agreement we discussed on the phone. Very fair terms, really. Addresses all the concerns your lawyer raised about the monitoring clauses by clarifying their scope and purpose. Everything's above board. Standard industry practice that's been happening for years without issue. We're just making it explicit now to avoid any future confusion." Eminem didn't touch the document, didn't even look at it. Instead, he opened his portfolio slowly, deliberately, pulling out a single sheet of paper and placing it face up on the table. "This is the Influence Index Program Overview. Your names are right here as program administrators. Case numbers for every artist you've been monitoring since 1997. Budget allocations for intervention protocols. Everything you just tried to spin as standard industry practice is detailed here as systematic surveillance and behavioral manipulation." The room temperature seemed to drop. The 3 VPs looked at the paper, looked at each other, looked at their lawyers. The silver-haired one tried to recover first. "I don't know where you got that document, but those are internal research materials taken out of context. Completely legal under the agreements artists signed, including you." "Maybe," Eminem said, voice calm but carrying an edge that made people pay attention. "But I don't think the 50 other artists in your program are going to see it that way when they find out. I don't think the media is going to care about your legal interpretations when they hear about the intervention protocols. And I really don't think your shareholders are going to appreciate explaining systematic surveillance to congressional committees." He let that sink in, watched the VPs exchange glances, watched their lawyers lean in to whisper frantically. "I've got everything," Eminem continued. "Every file from your servers. Prediction models, behavioral analyses, intervention logs with dates and outcomes. I know about the 2004 protocol that made me sick. I know about the manufactured feuds. I know about every time you manipulated my life to generate data points for your algorithms." The younger VP, guy in his 40s trying to act tough, leaned forward. "Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not conceding that it is, you signed contracts giving us permission for this research. You can threaten to go public, but you'll destroy your own career in the process. Nobody wants to work with an artist who leaks confidential business information." Eminem smiled, and it wasn't friendly. "See, that's where you're wrong. I'm not threatening to leak anything. I'm telling you what happens if you don't shut this program down in the next 72 hours. Every file I have goes to the New York Times, Washington Post, Rolling Stone, every outlet that matters. I'll hold a press conference where I explain in detail how you've been treating artists like lab rats. I'll contact every artist in your program personally and tell them to check their own contracts. And then I'll sit back and watch your company burn." "You'll be violating your NDA," the 3rd VP said, older woman who'd been quiet until now. "We'll sue you for everything you have." "Good luck with that," Eminem shot back. "You really want to be in court explaining the influence index to a jury? You want discovery where my lawyers get to subpoena every internal communication about the program? Because I'll drag it out for years, make it as public and ugly as possible. And even if you win eventually, even if you bankrupt me, the damage to your reputation will be permanent." The silver-haired VP held up a hand, silencing his colleagues. "Let's say hypothetically we were willing to discuss shutting down this research program you're describing. What exactly are you asking for?" "3 things," Eminem said, ticking them off on his fingers. 1, you terminate every contract I have with this label immediately, no strings, no restrictions. 2, you pay me actual earnings from the past 5 years, not the adjusted numbers you've been feeding me, and I know there's a difference because I've seen the real revenue reports in your files. 3, You shut down the influence index completely, destroy all data, all algorithms, all research materials, and you never run anything like it again. That's absurd, the younger VP said. You're asking us to give up years of research and development, millions of dollars in investment. I'm asking you to stop treating human beings like they're products you can optimize, Eminem interrupted. And I'm giving you a way to do it quietly, with dignity, without the whole world knowing what you've been doing. That's more generous than you deserve. The VPs asked for privacy, moved to an adjoining office visible through glass, made phone calls, calculated their options. 25 minutes later, they returned. We're prepared to offer contract termination, pending 6-month transition. 1 month maximum, Eminem cut in. Try again. The VP's jaw tightened. Fine, 1 month. We'll audit the earnings through third-party arbitration. No arbitration. You pay me the difference in full within 30 days or I release everything. That's not reasonable. I'm not interested in reasonable. You've been stealing from me for years. Pay me what you owe. The woman VP leaned forward. And the program? You're asking us to destroy years of proprietary research. You've got 72 hours, 3 days from now. Either the influence index is dead and you can prove it, or I start calling journalists. What stops you from going public anyway after we pay you? Eminem pulled out a second document. Mutual NDA. I stay quiet, you shut down. But if you restart under a different name, every file I have goes public. They conferred again, came back with tight voices. 1 month transition. Full earnings within 30 days. Program shut down in 72 hours with documentation. Mutual NDA effective immediately. One more thing. Every artist in the program gets notified, gets option to terminate the monitoring clauses. Absolutely not. Then we don't have a deal. More consultation. 45 days for artist notification. 30. 45 is final. Eminem looked at his lawyer, got a nod. Fine. Papers were drawn up, reviewed, signed. Hands were shaken with zero warmth, just legal formality. As Eminem walked out of that building into the gray afternoon, he felt something close to victory, but not quite. Because winning meant he'd had to fight in the first place. Meant years of his life had been stolen that he'd never get back. But he'd won, and that mattered, that counted for something. The next month, Eminem verified compliance obsessively. Forensic analysts confirmed terminations were real. When docs came through and the payment cleared, 7 figures more than expected. He felt relief mixed with responsibility he hadn't asked for. 2 weeks in, an artist called. I got this weird letter from the label about monitoring provisions in my contract. You know anything about that? Yeah, get a lawyer you trust and have them audit everything you've ever signed. Check for language about behavioral monitoring, data collection, intervention protocols. Similar calls came in over the following weeks. Artists realizing they'd been subjects in an experiment they never consented to, looking to Eminem for guidance. He couldn't tell them everything because of the NDA, but he could point them toward lawyers who understood what they were up against, could connect them with other artists who were asking the same questions, could make sure they weren't facing this alone. 3 months later, another artist called. They lied to us. The program never stopped, they just moved it, renamed it. My people found evidence they're still running surveillance on at least 20 artists right now. Ice flooded Eminem's veins. You're sure? Positive. Different company name, but same algorithms, same personnel, just transferred. They spun it off to technically comply with your agreement, but it's the same program. That's when Eminem knew diplomacy was over, knew that trying to handle this quietly had been a mistake, knew that these people only understood one language and it wasn't negotiation. He'd tried to give them a way out that preserved everyone's dignity, tried to believe they'd honor their agreement once they understood the consequences of not doing so, but they'd chosen to lie, chosen to keep exploiting artists, chosen to bet that he wouldn't actually follow through on his threats about going public. They'd made a bad bet. He called his lawyer. Remember those files we've been holding as insurance? Time to use them. Marshall, they'll sue you for violating the NDA. Legal fees could bankrupt you. I know. Do it anyway. The story broke on a Thursday in June. By afternoon, congressional investigations announced. By Monday, the VPs resigned. Label's stock dropped 30%. One interview. Why risk everything? Because someone sent me a message at 2:47 a.m. that woke me up. Because staying quiet would have made me complicit. The quote became a rallying cry. Lawsuits proceeded. Regulations passed. The VPs faced criminal charges. The influence index died. And Eminem? He kept making music on his own terms, through his own label built with people he trusted. The victory had cost him legal fees, stress, paranoia that never fully went away. But he'd proven artists didn't have to accept exploitation as the price of success. His label became a model: transparent contracts, fair profit sharing, real creative freedom. Other artists took notice, some joined him, others used his structure to negotiate better terms. The industry was forced to evolve. Months after everything had settled, after the lawsuits reached settlements and the regulations passed and the industry slowly started pretending it had always cared about artist rights, Eminem's phone buzzed late one night. Blocked number. His first instinct was to delete it. Too many memories of that first message at 2:47 a.m., but something made him open it. 2 words, "Thank you." He stared at it. Tried calling back. Disconnected. Tried tracing. Hidden. His mind went back to the business manager's house. That moment at the door when Eminem had asked about the 2:47 a.m. text. The manager had said, "I can't confirm that," but his eyes had held something, recognition maybe, or guilt, or both. And that detail about the surveillance footage angles, the ones Eminem had never seen before, those would have required deep system access. The kind a business manager negotiating those contracts would definitely have. Plus the timing matched. The manager had mentioned he'd been working on his exit plan for months. And that first text came through January, right when the manager would have been gathering his own evidence for disappearing. The text had said, "Check your contracts, not check the surveillance or check the files." And who would naturally think of contracts first except someone who'd spent years negotiating them? But Eminem would never know for certain. The manager had chosen his words carefully, neither confirming nor denying, leaving just enough ambiguity that it could have been someone else. Maybe that was intentional, plausible deniability in case things went wrong. Or maybe Eminem was seeing patterns that weren't there, connecting dots that didn't actually connect. Whoever it was, they'd changed everything with one text. Woken him up, given him tools to break free, trusted him to act. That anonymous conscience had rippled outward, touching dozens of artists, reforming practices, bringing down a program that had operated in shadows for decades. One person acting alone had started an avalanche. Eminem saved that final thank you message, screenshotted it before it could delete itself like the others, kept it as a reminder. Not of who sent it, because he'd probably never know, but of what it represented. The idea that anyone, anywhere, could make a difference if they chose to act instead of accepting corruption as inevitable. The story didn't end with perfect justice. Some of the people responsible got away with light consequences. Some damage couldn't be undone. Some artists never fully recovered from years of manipulation. But it ended with something more important than justice. It ended with change. With artists understanding they had power. With industry executives knowing they were being watched now. With systems of exploitation exposed and forced to evolve. And it ended with Eminem standing independent for the first time. Truly free. Fully in control. Owing nothing except maybe that anonymous person who'd warned him and trusted him to act. He'd learned the most important lesson. Trust nobody automatically. Question everything, read every word, including fine print. Pay attention to the cage before the bars become too strong. Because when you stop paying attention, when you decide it's easier to just go along, that's when they slip the leash around your neck. And by the time you feel it tightening, it's almost too late. Almost, but not quite. Never quite. There's always a chance, always a moment to choose fight instead of submit. Where freedom matters more than security. Where you can risk everything for the chance to actually own it. That choice, that refusal to accept control. That's what separates artists who survive with souls intact from cautionary tales about trusting the wrong people with your career, your life, your freedom. Eminem had made his choice, fought his battle, won his freedom. And every day since, he'd worked to make sure other artists knew they had the same power to fight back. The surveillance was over. The influence index was dead. The cage was broken. He was finally truly free.